Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Book Trek 2022. This is a 2-month mission that myself and a bunch of other booktubers are embarked on to celebrate Star Trek fiction. We did it last year and had a great deal of fun, so we're... Well, somebody woke up, just briefly. It's a very warm day, perfect for naps that turn into siestas, that then turn into more naps. For her, anyway. We are celebrating Star Trek fiction this time around in 2 parts. The first month, August, will be The Wrath of Book Trek, which is going back to old favorites. For me, a pretty clear line being drawn between the Roddenberry era Star Trek and the Kurtzman era Star Trek that we are in right now, with the dividing line being the very pretty, very stupid J.J. Abrams movies that sort of took Star Trek and said, I know that the number one thing that has been most prized about this entire franchise for 50 years, beyond any other aspect of it, the number one thing that's been most prized here has been continuity. So I'm going to rip that away. And we're going to see what Star Trek is without that. Now, J.J. Abrams at least had the good faith to say, well, if I'm going to strip away 50 years of lovingly created continuity, I'm going to do it quite literally by putting my movies in an alternate reality. And he did. The Kirk and Spock and McCoy and whatnot that we see in the J.J. Abrams movies are not our Roddenberry, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, except for the Roddenberry Spock who journeys into that alternate reality and dies there. Aside from that, there are all new iterations of characters who can have any kind of history that you want. That's what made the J.J. Abrams movies, for me, so much fun to watch, is that, as silly as it will sound to non-fans, there was nothing at stake. And that's why once the Alex Kurtzman and Akiva Goldsman Star Trek launched, everyone wanted to know, okay, is this in the J.J. Abrams universe? Is this the so-called Kelvin timeline? This isn't Roddenberry Star Trek, right? This can't possibly be Roddenberry Star Trek. And for the first month of Book Trek 2022, I am going to deal with Roddenberry Star Trek in all of its incarnations. And I want to start, I had a plan in mind to start yesterday, but then I wanted to pay at least a little tribute to Nichelle Nichols, who played Lieutenant Uhura, and who just died right on the eve of Book Trek 2022. So I switched things around, and now I want to talk about the book I would have talked about yesterday, a big, fat novel that was really well received. It sold really well. It's by A.C. Crispin, and it is Sarek, her gigantic novel that is, among other things, the biography of Mr. Spock's father, Ambassador Sarek of Vulcan, who was played by the great Mark Lenard, who is, as far as I know, still the only actor to play each of the 3 signature alien races from the original Star Trek, Romulans, Klingons, and Vulcans. As far as I know, he's still the only actor to do that. He was Sarek of Vulcan. He was the Romulan commander in Balance of Terror, and he was also the Klingon captain who survives for about a minute at the beginning of Star Trek the Motion Picture. But other than that, I don't think any other actor has done that. Mark Lenard does a fantastic job. He's incredible in Star Trek 3, the movie. And we know from his appearances all over the place in Star Trek, from Journey to Babel, where he makes his original appearance as Spock's father, in the animated series, the great episode Yesteryear, written by Dorothy Fontana, and then in The Next Generation as well. From those appearances in canon plus the movies, we can sort of piece together a fairly long and elaborate life story for Sarek. And A.C. Crispin decided to make that a narrative load-bearing column in this novel. There is a plot here, a rather elaborate plot. This movie takes place, as you can tell from the livery there, this movie takes place after all of the original Star Trek movies. So after Star Trek V and after Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. So our core cast of characters are older. Kirk, Spock, McCoy, they're all older. And all of their secondary characters are older as well, including James Kirk's nephew, Peter, who we see as a little boy in Operation Annihilate in the original series. And who in this series is a young man. He's a grown man. He is going to Starfleet. He is facing the Kobayashi Maru, the great no-win scenario simulation that all cadets face. And Jim Kirk, of course, is famous for being the only cadet to beat the no-win scenario. And we're wondering, the course of the opening pages of this novel, is Peter Kirk a chip off the old block? Is he a Kirk in the true sense of the word? Is such a thing heritable? That sort of thing. But he gets involved in the book's main plot, which is that there is a group, a nefarious group, of keep aliens off Earth. Keep a xenophobic group that has chapters all over the world that stage protests outside alien embassies that want aliens off Earth. They want aliens out of Earth politics. They want Vulcan out of the Federation. They don't trust Vulcans at all. They accuse Vulcans of having mind control powers, based in part on fact. The Vulcans in Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek are touch telepaths who can, in some extreme moments, influence the minds of others even without touching them. We see Mr. Spock do that a couple of times in the original series. This xenophobic group wants those aliens gone, and since Sarek is an ambassador, this affects him deeply. And A.C. Crispin decides to weave this together with the events of Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, the movie, in which I love Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, don't get me wrong. I think it's a fantastic movie. I've watched it more times than I can count. But it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Its conclusion doesn't make a whole lot of sense. In that movie, there is a renegade Klingon who is using a prototypical weapon in order to sow havoc and get the Klingons to declare war on the Federation and whatnot. And there's a female chancellor of the High Council, Azetbur, who's trying to stop that. Her father had a dream of a better world. Her father in the movie is played by David Warner, who we just lost. And at the end of the movie, I don't want to spoil the end of the movie, but at the end of the movie, it turns out that the renegade Klingon had lots of help. He had lots of accomplices. And some of them are not who you would expect. And those issues are simply not addressed in the movie. The movie makes the cardinal mistake of bottle episode drama, which is what the movies basically are, by exploding the plot open in 1,000 directions in the very last moment of the very last act and not addressing them. A.C. Crispin in this novel tries to address some of those questions. So, given all of that, I always talk on this channel about whether or not a novel, especially a knockoff novel, it's something derivative of other people's content, can stand on its own. And can this novel stand on its own when I've just described that the character that Mark Leonard played for 50 years has a 50-year history, spotted all over episodes and movies, and also that the action of this book, at least in large part, is derived from a Star Trek movie. So the question arises, can this book stand on its own without those things? And the answer, unfortunately, is a complete and resounding no. This is a novel for Star Trek fans who know those things. But, and on one level, you could say that makes this an unsuccessful novel. And in a way, I would have to insist on that. I hate to say it, but I would have to insist on that. There's also a way in which this is an unsuccessful novel, even on its own terms, because A.C. Crispin was much more enamored of Peter Kirk's elaborate subplot in this book than any reader will be. He is kidnapped by the Klingons, a renegade sect led by the ambassador we see in Star Trek The Undiscovered Country, played by John Schuck, who had always wanted to play in Star Trek. The Klingon ambassador in that movie, you won't remember his name. I don't think he's ever named in the movie. He is in the credits, but I don't think he's ever named in the movie, and the only thing you'll remember him from that movie, if you're a casual Star Trek fan, is that he's the one who says there can be no peace as long as Kirk lives. This book gives that ambassador a large backstory and a large subcast of his own, and Peter Kirk is abducted by a group of renegade Klingons and a certain group of their cat's paws, who you are hoping for half the book that you are wrong about who those cat's paws are, and you aren't wrong. You just don't want to believe it until the end. But he's kidnapped by this group, and one of his captors is a Klingon woman who is betrothed to a brute. She's the daughter of the ambassador. She has to obey the rules. She has to marry this man. She doesn't want to. And she's Peter Kirk's jailer, but he's got away with the ladies. And they eventually form a connection, and it is a snoozer. It is a snoozer, which is mystifying because Annie Crispin knew how to tell a story. She not only wrote 1 million books, but she was honored for her derivative stuff. This is basically a movie and TV tie-in she was part of. There's an actual group, an organized group of people who get jobs doing movie and TV tie-in material, and she was honored by them, loved by them. You only had to be in the same room with this person for a minute to know why that would be true. But in addition to that, she was a hell of a teacher of writing to others. She had an amazing ability to sniff out whether or not the person in front of her who she just met had an actual story inside them. She could sniff it out like an X-ray. Is there nothing there just vaporing around like a lot of people who fancy writing do? Or is there something there? Is there something that shows up on the X-ray? If something shows up on the X-ray, she wanted to get it out. She wanted to find it, get the person to realize what it is, get them to work, get them to make it real in the world. She and her friends always used to say, there's no time to waste, and only you can tell this story. She was really good at that. I don't know why, in this book, those instincts deserted her. I don't know why she didn't take a step back at the manuscript and say, there is a little bit too much Peter Kirk in here. There is just a bit too much Peter Kirk in here. But the compensation is that we get a huge amount of the backstory of Ambassador Sarek. We get especially his relationship with his human wife, Amanda Grayson, Spock's mother, who we learn is human long before we meet Sarek, long before we know anything about Spock at all. He mentions in the Corbomite maneuver, there's this horrible, imposing alien that's on the main viewing screen of the bridge of the Enterprise, and some quips are traded about this alien's imposing manner. And Spock says, oh, he reminded me of my father. And Scotty says, well, then may heaven have helped your mother. And Spock says, on the contrary, she considers herself a most fortunate Earth woman. But she's wonderfully played in Journey to Babel and is fondly remembered by Star Trek fans. And this gives us, not only through her journals, her personal journals, her glimpses of all the years of her marriage to Sarek, but also it gives us very poignantly her final months of life, set in the time frame of the novel where Spock is older, he's been dead and come back to life, where Kirk has been an admiral, is now a captain again. Amanda Grayson contracts a disease. She's old. She's already very old, so she couldn't fight it off anyway, but she certainly can't fight it off at her age. And so it's quickly apparent in the opening pages of the novel that she is just going to dwindle and die. And when I first read this book, I was impatient for that to happen. That feels monstrous now, especially considering the grace of the writing involved in those scenes. But it seemed to take forever. And in my own defense, I wasn't quite as aware when I first read this that it does take forever. That it does. And that one of life's most poignant and unspeakable truths, something you cannot say. I'll say it to you, because you're not real. You're my imaginary booktube friends. But any of you who've been through this will know that I'm right, even though we don't like to say it. Which is that it is an unbelievable mercy to have a loved one die instantly. That is an unbelievable mercy to all the living, who are the only people who can benefit from mercy. I know there's a standard Hallmark card, piety about an old person limbed in grace, dying peacefully in bed, surrounded by their family of many generations, with the linen nice and white and the light falling through the window at just such an angle. That's not how it goes, at all. It's a long, slow process, and it has no victories, and it is soiled at the end by usually a slippage of the mind, even when a person does not have dementia as an active element of what kills them. The mind still goes in the last few days. It's usually, in a situation like that, something you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. So when people, our way of saying this, so as not to tempt fate, I guess, or to be superstitious, our usual way of talking about this with elderly relatives, if an elderly relative gets out of the shower and just keels over face down of a massive brain aneurysm or a heart attack and is gone in an hour, we usually call that a horrible tragedy, ripped away from their family, gone before their time. But the horrible truth, as any of you will know if you went through this, is that that is ultimately more merciful for everybody than a long, slow decline. And what A.C. Crispin is describing here in the pages devoted to Amanda's last days is a long, slow decline. And at the very end of that decline, when Amanda knows that the end is near, Sarek knows that the end is near, Spock has been called to Vulcan. And Kirk and McCoy with him. He knows the end is near. Amanda is under no illusions about this. When Sarek gets a call from the President of Earth, telling him that there is a crisis, that a renegade Klingon has taken a group on a planet hostage and is demanding to negotiate, and that the Federation needs its best negotiator to go to the scene. It's a long journey by warp, it's a long process, it's a long journey back. Sarek knows when he gets that message that Amanda will certainly die while he is away, and she is heartbroken that he is leaving. She wants him to stay. As Spock points out in one of those moments, your leaving will certainly hasten her death. And Sarek decides to do it anyway. Mystifying to me. Absolutely mystifying. Why Sarek would say yes to that. He does say yes. He agrees to go. He feels it's his duty, that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one. When Annie Crispin was confronted on this point by readers of this book, and maybe old friends of hers from the old convention days, she said, sometimes people aren't what you want them to be. Which is true. It's pretty annoying for an author to say that and then to rely on it. When Spock is outraged. In his coldly Vulcan way, he's outraged that his father is going to leave his mother, knowing he'll never see her alive again. Sarek says, well, she won't be alone. You're here. And Spock says, you're the one she wants. And it doesn't matter. Sarek goes. Because Sarek has in this book a theory as to what is going on here. What is the force behind the events at the end of the Undiscovered Country? What is the force behind this sudden surgence of xenophobic groups on Earth? What is the force behind this Klingon ambassador's renegade group that he has gathered? Sarek thinks it's all connected, and he thinks it poses an existential threat to the Federation. So he feels that his higher duty is involved. He's the only one who suspects this, and he's the only one who thinks he can get to the heart of it. How on earth can he endanger the welfare of the whole Federation because of his wife? Because of an explicitly personal thing. So he goes. And we get heartbreaking scenes when Amanda eventually does enter that period of decline. I'm telling you, even when the disease is not mental, your brain eventually goes. Most people don't go just clear-headed to death. And that can be heartbreaking. And it is heartbreaking, and A.C. Crispin does not shy away from it. At the end, Amanda is continually asking, where is Sarek? Is that you, Sarek? Is that you? Are you there? She's constantly asking that. Spock sends a message to Sarek saying, my presence is not a comfort to her. She wants you. And it doesn't matter. Sarek does not get back in time. And when he does get back, Sarek and Spock is furious with him. Sarek says, these emotions that you're showing don't do you any credit. They don't speak well of your training as a Vulcan. And Spock says, well, if this is what my training as a Vulcan is supposed to be, if you are an example of that, then I'm glad it doesn't speak well. They have to work together in solving the problem that Sarek has identified during the pages when we get it, when the pages that are not devoted to Peter Kirk. But they have to work together to solve that problem, but it is very icy. There is a novel here that is different from the one we're getting, that has a little bit less of the big, MacGuffin Federation threat. It has much less of Peter Kirk, and has a whole lot more of a rift in the family that bids fair to split Mr. Spock from his father again. Spock and Sarek had not spoken for years when we meet them in Journey to Babel, because Spock decided that rather than go to the Vulcan Science Academy, he would enter Starfleet, the first Vulcan to enter Starfleet. Against his father's wishes, they have not spoken in years. And in this novel, we learn that Sarek threatened to disinherit him if he did that. Because he views it as a purely emotional decision. And one of the reasons why Sarek might be extra touchy about a purely emotional decision made on the part of his son is because of an entire raft of Roddenberry-era Star Trek that fans and writers, and A.C. Crispin was very much both, don't know quite what to do with. And that is the fact that Sarek had a wife before Amanda, and that the son of that union embraced emotion. Sybok, Spock's half-brother from Star Trek V, is played by Lawrence Luckenbill, is a full-blooded Vulcan who was the son of Sarek and his first wife, Terea, and who left Vulcan in disgrace for embracing his emotions. Sybok comes up a couple of times in the Amanda sections of this book. Not enough. Sybok has never had the kind of fictional treatment that such an explosive change in the canon requires, and it's mainly, I think, because Star Trek fans are kind of split on whether or not Star Trek V is canon. There was a vocal minority, and maybe not minor, maybe they were the majority, there was a vocal contingent of Star Trek fandom when Star Trek V came out that said, this isn't canon. This is what you get if you let Bill Shatner direct this thing. This can't be canon. Spock doesn't have a brother. Sarek did not marry a Vulcan priestess, or a Vulcan aristocrat, before he married a human woman. Nevertheless, Sybok's name does come up a couple of times, not nearly as prominent as he could be in this book, but we do get a little of that, and we get a little more of the key moments in Sarek's past as reflected in Amanda's journals. And Star Trek fans know what's coming, right? Fans who have watched Sarek throughout the whole of Mark Leonard's life know from Star Trek The Next Generation that when Amanda died, long afterwards, at some point, Sarek marries again. So this would be his third wife. And it's another human woman. He, again, 2 times in a row, he does not marry a Vulcan woman. Spock's stepmother is considerably younger than he is. And in the autobiography of Mr. Spock, the hardcover novel that came out a couple of years ago, it's pretty clearly indicated that Spock does not like his human stepmother. And that she doesn't really like him. My point here being that this is a weird misfire from an author who could diagnose a misfire a country mile away. So I'm a little confused as to some of the red herrings that this book chooses to chase. Sarek's story on its own is unbelievably fascinating. It does not require a huge Federation-threatening MacGuffin, nor does it require hundreds of pages devoted to the twerp Peter Kirk. It requires something else, a different narrative framework. The journals of Amanda Grayson would be a great place to start. And maybe someday somebody will write a book that sort of concentrates on that story to the exclusion of all else. It can't be called Sarek, because this one's called Sarek. Maybe it's called I, Sarek. There are odd little details in here that A.C. Crispin should have picked up on. At one point, Peter Kirk, for instance, is arguing with his Klingon captor about the death of Captain Kluge from Star Trek III, from my favorite Star Trek movie, played by Christopher Lloyd, who had always, again, like John Schuck, wanted to be in Star Trek. The Klingon commander in that episode, at the end, when the Genesis planet is crumbling all around them, insists on fighting James Kirk in hand-to-hand combat. And at the very end, when he's fallen off the cliff, he grabs Kirk by the ankle to drag him down with him, and Kirk kicks him in the face repeatedly until he falls down into lava. And William Shatner, unfortunately, again, I'm not going to champion Shatner's acting ability, but it was like take 20 when he did this. And you if you're an actor, you don't want to do the same line exactly mechanically over and over again. So you have to vary it up a little. And that sometimes means that the take the director goes with will be a weird reading of the line. The line when Kirk is kicking that captain, that Klingon captain, is, "I have had enough of you." And it doesn't come out right. And I can assure you that Shatner's first few readings of that line did come out right. It's just, it was take 15 or 17 that they took. At one point, Peter, Kirk, and his Klingon captor are talking about that moment, and I won't be the only Star Trek fan. A.C. Crispin, Annie Crispin should have been the first person to look at that scene and say, well, how would anybody know that? Kirk wouldn't put those details in his report. And even if he did, how would the Klingons know about that? About a Starfleet report about what happened in the last minute of a fist fight? Bits and pieces like that pop up all throughout here. For instance, in one scene, Sarek is surprised to learn from Mr. Spock that Mr. Spock is, in fact, in extremis, able to exercise telepathic control over others from a distance. Sarek doesn't seem to be able to do that, and it seems to knock him off his pins and needles that his son can do it. Which is fascinating in a way. This author used to have a whole array of sayings for her students, for her many students, both formal and informal. Everyone who knew her was a student in one way or another. She had such a great grasp of the bones of storytelling. And she had an array of phrases that she used to use with people when they were wandering away. She would say, let's bring the sheep back to pasture. She'd say, concentrate on the war, that sort of thing, to get people to focus on what they're doing. Don't go wandering off. And yet, this book is full of wandering off. Still, I liked it a whole lot more than I did when I read it whenever it came out 30 years ago. A whole lot more. What a book. I have seen in the intervening years this book both in paperback and in hardcover. Annie Crispin wrote the first best-selling Star Trek novel that was not, a movie tie-in, a specific movie tie-in. The first Star Trek novel that just became a bestseller, a New York Times bestseller on its own. And this had an enormous print run. I have seen this in paperback and in hardcover many, many times and passed it up. Because my initial reading of it was not as enjoyable as this current Book Trek reading of it was. So I'm hoping that sooner or later at the Brattle or elsewhere, I see it in either hardcover or paperback, so that I can add it to my Star Trek collection. Much like Uhura's song yesterday, this is a reread that made me like the book so much that I want to add it to my collection of print books. I have the e-file. I read the e-file here, but I would like the hardcover of this. But anyway, I don't know that I'm going to rank the Star Trek books that I talk about for Book Trek. I don't think that's the kind of event this is. But boy, oh boy, did I like this a whole lot more. So my Book Trek 2022 is off to a great start. I've had 2 rereadings of books that I didn't like the first time. That upon rereading, I liked a lot more. They, as an old friend of mine used to say, they improved a lot in the intervening years. Because he never wanted to admit that he had improved as a reader. And that maybe he stank as a reader before. So, Sarek by A.C. Crispin. I won't say that I recommend it. If you're a Star Trek fan, then probably you will really like it, especially an old Star Trek fan, an original series and original movies. As a novel on its own, it doesn't work. It barely explains its own terms. I'm not going to say that that's incompetence. This author was not incompetent. I'm going to say instead that this author was writing for an audience, which she often advocated doing. The audience here not needing the backstory. We'll go with that. So we'll see. We'll see if I can keep this streak up. I don't believe I can. In every iteration of Book Trek, there always comes that horrible moment where my time has been wasted. Last Book Trek, last year, that horrible moment stretched for the whole of the month devoted to Deep Space Nine. I'm really hoping that doesn't happen this time. And I think I have a way to avoid that. When I hit a rough patch, I will go to an old favorite and reread that. Last time, I didn't go to old favorites at all. I made a point of not doing that. This time, I can use them to save me if I hit a doldrum. So we'll see what happens next time. So I will wrap this up for now, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.